Hello, BookTube. I went out today. I left Hyde Cottage. I had errands to do, and one of them was a bit early in the morning. First thing, I believe, is a euphemism, and it was in the neighborhood of the Brattle Bookshop, a great used bookstore here in Boston. So I went to the Brattle Bookshop again, and I shopped, and it was great fun. I didn't find last time I went to the Brattle Bookshop, as you know, if you watched that video, I found a great heaping pile of books. I didn't find that many this time, and I don't know if that's just because I wasn't feeling all that good, or because I was a little pressed for time. I had one other errand to do somewhere else. But one way or another, I found enough to do a video, that's for sure, including this thing. Good Lord. The Oxford History of England has done some very big, very impressive volumes, and this one is called England Under the Norman and Angevin Kings, 1075 to 1225 by Robert Bartlett. In a perfect world, that would not be its title. That would be its subtitle. But this is a lot of the kings and the events that I know very well. I know especially the Angevin kings very well. So, and I remember this volume. This was from the year 2000. So before I was getting review copies again, but I remember it. I remember it being in bookstores. I saw this first, I think, in the Harvard bookstore, not the Harvard Coop, the Harvard bookstore in Cambridge. Great big thing. It'd be an absolute delight to reread chunks of this or all of it, and also to add it to the English history section out in the other room. And then this next one is a little bit ratty condition. I will clean this up. I will get rid of as much of the schmutz as possible, and I will fix up the frayed edges. But I wanted this in hardcover. I have this in trade paperback. I will now recycle the trade paperback. This is Marion Mead's biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Speaking of the Angevin kings, she was a great figure of the late Middle Ages. Just an incredibly fascinating figure. The wife of 2 kings, the mother of 3 kings, and a power broker and an intellect in her day. And the subject of many, many biographies, but the most popular one is one called Eleanor of Aquitaine and the 4 Kings, and I can't stand it. I just can't stand that biography. This is much, much better. It's a terrific biography. And now I found it in hardcover, and that's what I want. I will clean and gussy this up and put it on the shelf in the British royalty section, which this is definitely qualifies. I'll put it in British royalty right next to Henry II. I'll put it, fittingly enough, right in between Henry II and Richard the Lionheart. But that was wonderful to find them together. Almost certainly they came from the same person. Then we have a work of history, and this also I remember. This came out while I was getting review copies in the mail. I might even have reviewed this. I'll have to remember to look and see. And this is by Sam Willis, and it's called The Struggle for Sea Power, a Naval History of the American Revolution. There we have ships of the line firing in unison. And here is our author, who is, when he wrote this book, was a young salt. Fairly good-looking young salt. And I remember when I saw this thing, I immediately wanted it. I knew that I didn't have it. And I remembered as soon as I saw it that it's an extremely blood and swash type thing. It's just the kind of tone that you want for what was, after all, a massive naval war. And I wanted to read you a beginning just so that you can get a taste of it. You can get a taste of what I mean. The maps are all done in duotone. You can't make it out really on this camera, but the maps are fantastic, and they go on for pages and pages and pages. Let's see here. Yes. Once I heard an American boatman, with his boat trapped hard against rocks by a raging current, and with the boat's stern line hard as iron, scream for more slack as she began to grate and grind against sharp granite. You could see that he felt every blow as if he were receiving the wound himself. The boat was being subjected to gross moral indignity as much as to actual physical injury. With her hull exposed and her motions awkward, the tableau felt unnatural. It felt wrong. The boatman's eyes bulged, his chest swelled, and he bellowed an order. Now, in this situation, a British seaman would shout out ease or slack, referring directly to the stern rope that was bar tight, the tether that was holding the boat back from the safety of the open water. But Americans have another word, and theirs refers to the boat rather than to the lines by which she is held. As this particular situation worsened from accident to crisis, with the boat shuddering with every blow, the boatman set his shoulders back and roared at me, for it was I who had held the stern line. Liberty! The problem was not that the stern line was too tight, but that his precious boat, which encapsulated his livelihood, was trapped, pinned, restrained, imprisoned. The problem was not with the line, but with the person who was holding the line and the person who was denying that ship her liberty. The problem was with me. I was immediately enchanted by the way that the word liberty survives in American but not British maritime language. In a split second, I began to write this paragraph in my head. In another, the soundtrack of more splintering wood and American thundering, I began to write this book around how 13 British colonies in America won their independence, and in their eyes, their freedom, their liberty, from Britain between 1775 and 1783. 5 years later, I have completed it, and it is time for me to say sorry. I'm sorry, Fred. I'm sorry that I wasn't paying attention and that your precious boat was damaged. On the banks of that river, we had our own mini maritime revolution, and when I finally started to pay attention and eased off that line, your beautiful boat won her liberty. That's just the preface. That's even before the introduction. You're already in love with the author's writing style. And I remember that vividly about this book. So when I saw it, I thought two things immediately. Number one, oh, I don't have that. And number two, why on earth don't I have that? So now I do. I know the reason why I don't have it. I must have given it to somebody. Somebody probably expressed just the barest hint in, was there a naval component to the American Revolution? Probably just fired off the book. I've noticed that has slacked off quite a bit. Not only because I'm noticing with these videos the Sisyphean nature of constantly rebuying books that I like, but also because one of the things that really made firing off books that I should have otherwise kept very easy to do on a daily and weekly basis was the ease of the post office. I had a pile of books on one part of my desk that was always ready to go out. They were packaged, they were wrapped, they had the addresses all over them, and I would just fill a bag with as many as the bag would carry the next time I went out on an errand. But the pandemic has stopped the post office from feeling natural, and it has stopped most errands. So that's one of the reasons why I'm encountering these things and getting them rather than hopefully giving them up again. This next one is Natural History, an author I really like, Peter Matthiessen. This is his book, The Birds of Heaven, in which he studies cranes all around the world. And it's, that's fascinating on its own. He's not the only author who's done this, who's studied cranes around the world. But with this author, you come for the prose. He could write about anything, and it wouldn't matter to me. So, but I don't have this, and it is one I myself prefer his nonfiction to his fiction, and this is one that I don't have that I wanted. So, I'm not 100% sure how many of these things will come inside this room, but one of these next two will certainly do that. I'll save it for last because it was the find of the day. So the first one is A. St. John Adcock. This is A Book Lover's London. And this is an older book. This is what? 1913. And this is the author. It's not really a guidebook to London. It's got these wonderful illustrations, I believe by the author's brother, that run just, they're profuse throughout the whole book. I don't believe this is so much a guidebook to London as it is a guidebook to the London that isn't real. It's a guidebook to the author's experience of London through the things he's read. If I remember correctly, as I've read a little about this book, but I've never read it. And it's a perfect example of the kind of thing you'll find at the Brattle for $1 that you can, where it's not a risk at all to give this a try. Whereas in some small town Midwestern used bookstores where I have been and where I have been living in the town, so I patronize the shop on a regular basis, if they'd got something like this, it would have gone up on a pedestal on a little book stand behind the register with a price tag sticking out that said $30, $35, something like that, which means that it might be of interest, but I'm never going to explore it. If it's $1, I'm going to grab it and give it a try. That's too fascinating to leave out. And this last one was also $1. It's the find of the day. It's the one that I'm going to read first, and I'm going to enjoy it so much. I can show you the spine. The spine is Memories of a Hostess. There you go. Memories of a Hostess. Can we make that behave a little better? Let me give you, see if I can find the frontispiece here. So and get a better idea of what we're talking about here. This is by Mark Anthony Dwolf Howe. Memories of a Hostess. Mark M.A. Dwolf Howe, a literary historian and critic of the Boston bent, wrote a lot of books. And this is a book that he made in conjunction with Mrs. Fields. That is Mrs. Fields, the great Boston publisher and literary impresario James Fields' wife, who is mentioned all throughout this book as Mrs. Fields. I'm not sure. I've only read this book once, and it was borrowed from a library here in Boston. I've never actually owned it. I have the books that she helped to create about James Fields' literary friends. He knew everybody in the literary world in England and America. And their house on Charles Street was an amazing literary gathering place on a regular weekly basis of the whole intellectual world of late 19th century Boston, which I have often referred to as the greatest gathering of intellectuals in American history. They trooped in and out of that house on a regular basis, and they all knew her and loved her. They loved him. He had a gift for friendship. But they loved her as well. She did too. That was one of the main reasons that made them click. She was his second wife. And they really clicked because she also had an unbelievable talent for friendship. And she told Howe that he could make a book out of various literary tidbits and odds and ends that were in a dark recessed closet just inside the door at Charles Street. And that he could make a book out of that, provided he didn't throw too much emphasis on her. She didn't want the book to be mainly about her. A very typical thing. She was commonsensical, self-effacing, and also had the most infectious laugh imaginable. Imaginable. And the first person to be infected by it was her. If she had a funny story to tell, good luck getting her to finish it. Because she would be absolutely paralyzed with laughter before she got to the end. And no one in the room ever remembered the story. In any of those occasions. Those occasions happened almost every time the salon got together. And no one ever remembered what the story was about. They just remembered that they all just lost it. Our 21st century term would be that they all just lost it. And that is gone, of course, from their black and white photos and their marble statues in the Bates Hall at the library. What's gone is those evenings, the sound where the laughter could be heard from outside. With these great bearded men, you know, Emerson and Hawthorne and all of these others, just cracking up in these the sheer fun of those gatherings, which often spilled over into the Saturday Club that I mentioned on this channel before. But it lived mostly at Charles Street, and its guiding spirit, its impetus from start to finish, was Mrs. Fields, who I don't know if she's ever even named in this book. Her friends called her Annie, and she was ruined when Jim Fields died. Just ruined. Theirs had been a friendship, not just a marriage. And she was destroyed. And pulled further and further away into herself, to the point where she was conducting social enormities that she would have frowned upon in the days of her happiness. She was becoming a recluse, in danger of becoming a recluse. A friend of hers told her that. Several friends told her that you know, this becomes a habit like anything else, and if you indulge in it, it will take over, and you'll be dead while you're still alive. And no one wants that, including him. And she eventually took that advice with another name that's cropped up on this channel before, Sarah Orne Jewett, the great American novelist and critic, Sarah Orne Jewett. The two of them took up a deeply happy friendship for the rest of Sarah Orne Jewett's life. They lived together, they traveled together, spent enormous amounts of time talking about books and letters and reminiscing and laughing, eventually laughing. The world did hear that uncontrollable cataract of laughter again. And it was Sarah Orne Jewett that largely made that possible. And there was talk even in their day, at the end of the 19th century, there was talk even in their day of what maybe the real relationship was between them, the Boston marriage that they had. But I choose to think that it was just a friendship. And the weird kind of friendship that you make later in life that can often feel so like such a gift from the gods when you find a genuine friend later in life. And this is that book. This is the book that Howe put together. he could be a little on the insufferable side, but he knew when to step aside when he was doing a service to posterity, and that's what this book is. So this is diary entries, journal entries, hers and his, reminiscences, bits and pieces that didn't make it into Field's book of profiles of literary friends and acquaintances. Invaluable. An invaluable book for the literary and publishing life of 19th century Boston. It was $1. It was $1 at the Brattle. No one wants this. No one cares about this stuff but me. No one cares about the Saturday Club or any of these literary figures. Maybe somebody might care about Ralph Waldo Emerson. Or maybe, Nathaniel Hawthorne. But the rest of it? No. The Boston details? No. I remember from, 50 years ago when I read this the first time. I'm so glad I have a copy now. This will go on the shelf next to Field's book. But there's an amazing journal entry, for instance, just an example of what we're talking about here, where she writes in her journal about the news that has just broke that President Lincoln has been shot, that President Lincoln has been assassinated, and that the assassin is in custody. That the assassin, the actor John Wilkes Booth, is in custody. And then her next entry is, no, that was a false report. It turns out he's not in custody yet. He is still at large. And she ends the entry by saying, poor Edwin is here in Boston. John Wilkes Booth, equally famous or more so brother. Poor Edwin. It makes you remember, it puts you in the scene of so much that has gone on to fade away completely or to become just the stiff stuff of history. This is going in this room. It was an absolute joy to find. And maybe the same person who unloaded that book on Boston statues, or that old Douglas Shantucci book, Built in Boston, or whatever. Maybe that same person also got rid of this. But anyway, those were your Brattle books for today. We have a big book on Andrew in England, King Henry II. We have, in my opinion, the best biography of Eleanor of Aquitaine. We have The Struggle for Sea Power, a big, rollicking naval history of the American Revolution in all of its sprawling fields of action. And we have The Birds of Heaven, Peter Mathias' following cranes around the world. We have A Book Lover's London, where a man just traces around the literary ghosts of London. And a book that Mark Anthony Dwolf Howe titled Memories of a Hostess. I would have given it a different title, but I never agreed on anything. So there you go. That was our Brattle trip today. I know I always say this, but I don't imagine going back to the Brattle anytime soon, until next week. So if I'm wrong about that, you'll be the first to know. But I'm going to wrap this up for now, but I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.